Have you ever been alone in a room, only to hear a voice call your name? It's the kind of thing that makes your heart skip a beat, your skin prickle, and your mind race. You turn around, expecting to see someone there, but the room is empty. The silence that follows is deafening. It's unsettling, isn't it? Now, imagine that happening in a school at night, when the halls are deserted and the classrooms are locked. That's exactly what happened to Mrs. Thompson, a dedicated teacher at Maplewood High School. One evening, after the last bell had rung and the students had gone home, she stayed behind to grade papers. The school was quiet, too quiet. Then, from the hallway, she heard a faint, unmistakable voice of a child calling out. But there was no one there. The school was empty. Or so she thought. You might be thinking, it was probably just her imagination. But what if it wasn't? What if there was something or someone still lingering in the school after hours? Something that defied explanation. Mrs. Thompson decided to find out. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and her courage, she ventured into the dark, silent halls. What she discovered would change her life forever. But before we dive into the mystery, let me ask you, have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? A strange noise in the middle of the night. A shadow moving out of the corner of your eye. Most of us have had moments that made us question reality. And that's what makes this story so compelling. It taps into that universal feeling of unease, that fear of the unknown. It reminds us that sometimes, the world isn't as straightforward as we'd like to believe. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're wondering, what happened next? Who or what was calling out to Mrs. Thompson? Stick with me, because the answer is more chilling than you can imagine. As we unravel this mystery together, I want you to keep an open mind. What you're about to hear might just change the way you look at your own surroundings. So, grab a seat, turn off the lights, and let's step into the shadows of Maplewood High School. The truth is waiting. Mrs. Thompson had always been a dedicated teacher. Her passion for education was evident in the way she engaged with her students, always going the extra mile to ensure they understood the material. But recently, something had shifted. She found herself staying late at school more often, poring over lesson plans and grading papers, trying to keep up with the demands of her job. The once vibrant halls of Maplewood High School now felt eerily silent after hours, and the flickering fluorescent lights cast long shadows across the empty classrooms. It was during one of these late nights that she first heard the voice. At first, Mrs. Thompson thought it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. But as the nights wore on, the voice became more distinct, more persistent. It was a child's voice, soft and pleading, echoing through the empty halls. She tried to dismiss it, telling herself it was just the wind or the building settling. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Mrs. Thompson began to investigate. She spoke with the janitors, the security guards, and even the principal, but no one had any answers. The school had been empty for hours, and yet the voice persisted. She checked the attendance records, but all the students had gone home. There was no logical explanation for what she was hearing. As she delved deeper into the school's history, Mrs. Thompson uncovered a series of unsettling events. Years ago, a student had gone missing under mysterious circumstances. Despite an extensive search, the child was never found. Some whispered that the school was haunted, that the spirit of the missing child still lingered, seeking attention, seeking justice. But these were just rumors, stories passed down through the years. One evening, as Mrs. Thompson sat alone in her classroom, the voice returned. This time, it was clearer, more urgent. She followed the sound, her heart pounding in her chest. It led her to the old storage room at the back of the school, a place she had never ventured before. The door creaked open, and inside, she found a dusty old box labeled Lost and Found. Curious, she opened it, revealing a collection of forgotten items, a child's jacket, a worn-out book, and a small, tattered doll. Among the items was a photograph of a young girl, her eyes wide with fear. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped, and the door slammed shut behind her. The voice grew louder, now accompanied by the sound of soft footsteps. Mrs. Thompson turned around, but there was no one there. She was alone, or so she thought. As she stood frozen in place, The photograph slipped from her hands and fluttered to the ground. She bent down to pick it up, and as she did, a cold hand brushed against her shoulder. Spinning around, she found herself face to face with the girl from the photograph. Her eyes were filled with sorrow, her mouth moving soundlessly. Mrs. Thompson reached out, but the girl vanished before her eyes. Shaken, Mrs. Thompson stumbled out of the storage room, her mind racing. She had to find out who this child was, what had happened to her. But the more she searched, the more questions arose. Why had no one ever mentioned her? Why had she been forgotten? And most importantly, why was she reaching out to Mrs. Thompson now? The answers seemed just out of reach, slipping through her fingers like sand. But one thing was certain, the mystery of the voice, the child, and the secrets of Maplewood High School were far from over. And Mrs. Thompson was determined to uncover the truth, no matter where it led. Mrs. Thompson's determination to uncover the truth behind the mysterious voice led her deeper into the school's history. Her late-night research sessions revealed unsettling details about the school's past, including rumors of a tragic incident involving a missing child. Despite her growing unease, she pressed on, convinced that understanding the past was key to resolving the present mystery. One evening, as she reviewed old yearbooks in the school's library, a sudden chill swept through the room. The lights flickered, and the temperature dropped noticeably. Startled, Mrs. Thompson looked around, but the library was empty. She shook off the feeling, attributing it to the building's age and her own fatigue. However, the unease lingered. The following day, Mrs. Thompson decided to visit the school's archives to search for any official records related to the missing child. As she sifted through dusty files, she found a folder labeled confidential. Inside, she discovered a letter from a former teacher, warning against investigating certain areas of the school. The letter mentioned strange occurrences and advised caution. The teacher's name was Mrs. Caldwell, and the letter was dated over 20 years ago. Intrigued, Mrs. Thompson tried to find more information about Mrs. Caldwell. However, her search yielded little. It was as if Mrs. Caldwell had vanished from the school's history. No records, no photographs, nothing. This only deepened the mystery. Gotham. +1. List verse. +1. Haley had received an anonymous envelope at her office, with no return address. Inside was a single item, a torn page from what appeared to be the same journal Mrs. Thompson had found in the hidden room. The handwriting matched, frantic and looping, the ink smudged by what looked like old water stains or tears. At the bottom of the page, a chilling line had been scrawled in red ink, not part of the original entry, "Leave her alone or she disappears again." The implication was clear. Someone was watching not just Mrs. Thompson, but anyone connected to her, anyone who might help dig deeper. That morning, Haley had tried to trace the origin of the envelope, but the mailroom cameras had no record of it being delivered. It had just appeared. Haley's voice shook when they spoke on the phone, and for the first time, she begged her sister to walk away. But for Mrs. Thompson, that wasn't an option anymore. Determined to understand why someone would go to such lengths to silence her, Mrs. Thompson revisited the dusty, tucked-away archives after school, this time looking not for ghosts or missing children, but for names. Names of faculty, janitorial staff, or even students who had quietly disappeared from records around the same time Mrs. Caldwell had vanished. It was in those yellowing files that she stumbled across an incident report that made her blood run cold. A student named Lily Harrow, age 10, had gone missing 24 years ago. The file was sparse, almost deliberately vague. But what stood out most was the name listed under last adult contact, Mrs. Caldwell. The very teacher whose journal she'd discovered, whose warnings were buried in the school's shadows. It felt like a breakthrough until she turned the page and found a photocopy of a withdrawal form. It was signed, dated 2 weeks after Lily's disappearance, and it stated the child had been transferred to another school across the state. But the signature wasn't a parent's. It was a school administrator's, and the handwriting had been circled in red ink with a note, "Forged." Just as she was processing this, the door to the archive creaked open slowly behind her. Her breath caught as she turned around, expecting maybe a janitor or a late-working colleague, but it was Mr. Jenkins, the elderly janitor who'd warned her days ago. He stared at her for a moment, then slowly stepped inside and closed the door behind him. His voice was low, strained, like a man carrying a heavy secret. He told her she needed to stop, that she didn't know what kind of fire she was playing with. When she pressed him, his face hardened. "Some of us were here when Lily disappeared," he said. "We were told to keep quiet, for our own good. For our family's good." Before she could ask more, he slipped out, leaving behind only a dusting of footprints and more questions than answers. As Mrs. Thompson stood there alone again, holding that forged withdrawal form, a sense of dread settled over her. If someone had gone to such lengths to erase Lily's disappearance, what else had they covered up? Who else was complicit? And was it possible that Lily, or whatever was left of her, was still trying to reach out? The mystery that had started with a ghostly voice was unraveling into something much darker, a conspiracy buried beneath decades of silence, deception, and fear. And now that her sister was involved, and people from the past were emerging from the shadows, Mrs. Thompson realized this wasn't just about a haunted school anymore. It was about something far more human and far more dangerous. But just when she thought she was beginning to connect the pieces, something else shattered her already shaken sense of reality. That night, back at her house, she found the photo again, the same one of Lily, the same one she'd discovered in her desk, but it was now burned around the edges, warped by heat, and stuck to her kitchen table. And scrawled across the back, in that same red ink, "You were warned." She stared at the words, hands trembling. Someone had been inside her home. And they weren't finished yet. The next morning, the world outside looked deceptively ordinary. The sunlight streamed through the kitchen blinds, birds chirped in the distance, and cars passed by like any other Thursday in the sleepy town of Maplewood. But for Mrs. Thompson, the air felt heavier, the light dimmer, and every sound carried a warning. She hadn't slept much. The image of the burned photograph haunted her, the red-inked threat echoing in her mind long after she had scrubbed the message from the table, only to find the words seemed to remain burned into her memory. She tried calling Haley again, but it went straight to voicemail. That wasn't like her sister. She always picked up, even if just to say she was busy. The silence was loud and gnawed at her resolve like termites through wood. She left a message, trying to keep her voice steady, telling her sister to call back the moment she got it. But even as she hung up, dread pooled in her chest. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. On her way to school, she took a detour by Haley's apartment. The street was unusually quiet, and Haley's car was parked out front, another bad sign. She knocked on the door. No answer. A neighbor peered out from across the hall and said she hadn't seen Haley leave that morning, which was strange since she always left by 7 sharp. Mrs. Thompson's gut twisted. With the landlord's help and a shaky explanation, she managed to get inside the apartment. It was undisturbed, eerily clean. Too clean. Haley's laptop was still open on the dining table, her keys on the hook by the door. Her phone sat charging by the couch. But she was gone. It was like she had vanished mid-step, mid-thought. The only thing out of place was a piece of paper taped to the mirror in her bathroom. It was the same handwriting. Red ink. This time it read, "Last chance." She drove to Maplewood High with white knuckles gripping the steering wheel, her thoughts a chaotic mess of fear, confusion, and guilt. Someone had taken her sister or scared her into hiding. Either way, the message was clear: back off. But backing off wasn't in her nature, not anymore. This wasn't just a mystery to solve, it was personal now. When she got to school, she went straight to the principal's office, determined to confront someone, anyone, about what had been happening. But when she asked Principal Morgan about Mrs. Caldwell or the missing student, Lily Harrow, he immediately shut down, his face paling. He asked her to step into his office, closed the door, and in a hushed voice said, "I don't know what you think you've found, but some things are better left buried. People have been hurt before. I don't want you to be one of them." Then he handed her a folded slip of paper and said, "This came for you this morning." Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. Inside was a copy of her own personnel file, with a single word stamped across it in thick black letters: terminated. The dismissal was backdated yesterday. She stared at it, confused. "I haven't been fired," she said aloud, her voice shaking. Principal Morgan didn't meet her eyes. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You need to leave. Now." Everything was unraveling faster than she could process. She stepped out of the office in a daze, the hallway spinning slightly around her. Students passed by laughing, teachers gave brief nods, and everything seemed normal. But it wasn't. She felt eyes on her, not just from people, but from the walls themselves. She remembered Mr. Jenkins' warning. She remembered the girl's sorrowful eyes in that photograph. She remembered her sister's voice on the phone, full of fear. She exited the school building in a trance, unsure where to go, unsure who to trust. Everyone she thought she could rely on either refused to talk or was disappearing before her eyes. Her sister gone. Her job stripped from her. And someone, some unseen force, was manipulating every move she made. The idea that this was about a ghost, or a haunted school, seemed laughably simple now. This was something bigger. Something rooted in real danger, real secrets, and very real threats. The ghost, if it even was a ghost, might not be the most terrifying thing anymore. On her way back to her car, she noticed something new. Tucked under her windshield wiper was a flash drive, unmarked. She looked around the parking lot empty, except for a maintenance worker far off by the fence, sweeping leaves and not looking up. She pocketed the drive and drove home, hands clenched, nerves raw. Whatever was on it, she knew it would either offer answers or pull her deeper into the nightmare. She inserted the drive into her laptop with hesitant fingers. The screen flickered for a moment before a video file appeared. The title was just a date, 24 years ago to the day. She pressed play. The footage was grainy, silent, and black and white, taken from a ceiling corner of what looked like a classroom. The timestamp ticked by. The door opened. A young girl walked in. Lily. She stood there, confused, alone. Then another figure entered. But the camera glitched right at that moment, the footage cut off into static. When it resumed, the room was empty again. No Lily. No adult. Nothing. And then, just before the file ended, words appeared on the screen in blocky white text. You've seen too much. This is your only warning. Her breath caught. Her vision blurred. And as the screen faded to black, the lights in her house flickered once. Twice. Then everything went dark. Darkness swallowed Mrs. Thompson's home as if the night itself had turned hostile. Her laptop screen had gone black. The flash drive, now ice-cold in her trembling hand, felt heavier than it should have. In the silence, she could hear the soft ticking of her wall clock, each second dragging like a heartbeat in the void. The fear wasn't abstract anymore, it was here, present in the flickering shadows, in the still air, in the fact that her sister was gone, her job was gone, and now the lights in her home obeyed some force she didn't understand. She lit a candle, not for light but for the illusion of control. Her mind replayed the video, the girl, Lily, standing in the classroom, the glitch, the silence, the vanishing act. And then the message, threatening, direct, final. But it was something else, something small, almost imperceptible, that started to itch at the back of her mind, a reflection. Just before the feed cut, there was a faint reflection in the classroom's window. A figure outside. Watching. And it wasn't Lily. Unable to ignore it, she reopened the video, adjusting the brightness and scrubbing frame by frame through the footage, until she saw it a silhouette. Not a shadow. A man. Tall. Broad shoulders. Standing just outside the glass. Whoever had been watching Lily had been there before she vanished. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't supernatural. It was premeditated. Calculated. And someone had gone to great lengths to keep it buried. Her pulse raced. She needed help. She needed someone who hadn't turned on her yet, someone who might still be trustworthy. Against better judgment, she called Mr. Jenkins. When he arrived 20 minutes later, he looked different, less weary, more focused. He didn't even ask why she had called. He walked in and sat at the edge of her couch like a man who'd known this conversation was inevitable. She played the video for him. When it ended, he said nothing for a long time. Then he looked at her and said, I need to tell you something. But you're not going to like it. And with those words, the ground shifted beneath her. Mr. Jenkins wasn't just a janitor. 24 years ago, he had been an undercover investigator for a state education board, brought in after another teacher, Mrs. Caldwell, filed a report alleging misconduct by a school administrator. The administrator was accused of inappropriate behavior toward a student. That student was Lily Harrow. The accusations were quietly buried, the administrator reassigned to another school district, and Mrs. Caldwell was pushed into an early retirement. Jenkins stayed on at Maplewood, posing as maintenance staff, waiting for the right moment to expose the truth. But no moment ever came. Everyone who had tried to speak out either disappeared, was silenced, or simply broke under the pressure. Mrs. Thompson stared at him, horrified, the pieces crashing together with brutal clarity. The real horror wasn't a ghost or a haunting, it was a cover-up. A child hadn't vanished into thin air. She had been taken. Silenced. Her story erased by those who should have protected her. And now, 2 decades later, someone, maybe multiple people, were still protecting that secret. Mr. Jenkins confessed that he'd kept quiet all these years out of fear, but when Mrs. Thompson started digging, he knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came knocking again. The flash drive, the threats, even Haley's disappearance, none of it was random. It was part of the same system of control that had operated for decades, willing to erase lives and rewrite history to keep itself intact. Then, almost as an afterthought, he said something that shattered everything she thought she knew. That classroom where Lily disappeared. It used to be yours, didn't it? She nodded slowly, confused. That's not a coincidence, he continued. You and Lily, your birth records were altered. You both came from the same foster agency. You were placed into different families the same year. She froze. Are you saying Lily was my sister? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The implications crashed over her like a tidal wave. The voice she'd heard in the empty hallway wasn't just calling out for help, it had been calling out to her. Reaching out across years of silence, trauma, and abandonment. It wasn't just about uncovering the truth anymore. It was about reclaiming something that had been stolen from her. Her sister's voice hadn't disappeared. It had been waiting, buried in shadows, in files, in forgotten corners of a school too eager to hide its sins. The ghost wasn't just real. It was family. And just like that, everything she thought she knew about the mystery changed. The haunting wasn't a warning. It was a plea. A demand. A reckoning. And now that the truth was close, someone out there was growing desperate. Which meant the real danger was only just beginning. The air outside was thick with summer heat as Mrs. Thompson drove back toward the school, her heart slamming in her chest with each mile. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, the conversation with Mr. Jenkins still unraveling in her head like a thread that wouldn't stop tugging. The possibility that Lily was her sister, that the little girl who had vanished into silence was her own flesh and blood, was not something she could even begin to process. Every memory she had of childhood now felt like a lie, a faded photograph doctored by strangers. She remembered a foster home, sure, a brief period of confusion before she was placed with the Thompsons. But no one had ever mentioned a sibling, much less a lost one. And now, after all these years, that girl was reaching out from the shadows, trying to be found. Trying to be remembered. But with every step closer to the truth, the walls were closing in, and Mrs. Thompson knew she was running out of time. As she pulled into the school parking lot, she noticed a black SUV idling across the street. Tinted windows. Engine still running. She froze, her instincts screaming. This wasn't paranoia. This was deliberate. They were watching her, making sure she knew it. She stepped out of the car slowly, scanning the area, her pulse in her ears. As she approached the school, her phone buzzed. No number. Just a message. Principal Morgan wants to see you. Alone. Now. She hesitated, staring at the screen, the sense of danger gnawing at her gut. Still, she walked inside, each step echoing louder than the last in the hollow hallways. Principal Morgan was waiting in his office, the blinds drawn, his expression cold and unreadable. He didn't offer her a seat. He just handed her a manila envelope, thick with documents. Read it, he said. Inside were photocopies, her own adoption papers, heavily redacted, with unfamiliar signatures and references to a sealed case involving a minor. There were disciplinary forms for a teacher named Caldwell. Meeting minutes from board sessions labeled confidential. At the bottom was a final document, one that made her stomach turn, a legal agreement signed years ago by the school district's legal counsel and an unnamed guardian. It was a settlement. Financial. In exchange for silence. "You're not supposed to have these," she said, her voice cracking. "You're right," he replied. "Neither am I. But they sent me a message last night. Told me to get you under control, or they'll do it for me." He paused, then looked her dead in the eye. "You have a choice, Mrs. Thompson. Walk away now, and no one else has to get hurt. Not your sister. Not you. Not whatever memory you're chasing. We both know this isn't just about ghosts and missing girls. This is bigger. Names you don't want to say out loud. People with power. Walk away, and this ends. Keep digging, and someone's going to make sure you disappear too." The silence in the room stretched long and cruel. He wasn't threatening her. He was begging her. She saw it in the way his hand trembled, in the sweat on his brow. He was scared too. Maybe he had been for years. Maybe he'd made his choice long ago, and now he was offering her the same bitter deal. Safety for silence. She left without answering him, the envelope clutched in her hand like it might burn through her skin. Outside, the SUV was gone, but the fear wasn't. If anything, it had burrowed deeper. Back home, she found her living room lights on, even though she remembered turning them off. Her stomach sank. On her coffee table was a Polaroid photograph, freshly developed. It showed her standing in the school archives, taken through the slats of the vent above the door. Someone had been watching her that night. Up close. The photo was time-stamped. It had been printed that afternoon. The message was clear: they were in her house. They could be anywhere. And they were done playing games. That night, she sat in the dark, holding the envelope and the photograph, trying to make an impossible decision. If she pushed forward, she might uncover what really happened to Lily and maybe even expose the network of silence that had protected predators and punished the truth. But doing so could cost more than her job. It could cost her sister. Her life. Her sanity. If she stayed quiet, everything would go back to normal. The lights would stay on. No more ghostly voices. No more strangers tracking her every move. But Lily would stay forgotten. A whisper in a hallway. A face in a photo no one remembered. Mrs. Thompson looked out her window, eyes scanning the darkness for the next threat, the next message, the next warning. She didn't know who to trust anymore. The school had betrayed her. The people she worked with had turned their backs. Even her own memories were unraveling. And in the stillness, in that terrible quiet, one question remained louder than all the rest. Was she brave enough to lose everything for the truth? And worse, was she already too late? The storm hit just after midnight. Wind howled through the trees, rain lashed against windows, and thunder rolled across Maplewood like some ancient force had finally been stirred from its slumber. Inside the school, lit only by the pale flicker of emergency lights, Mrs. Thompson stood in the heart of the abandoned East Wing, soaked to the skin, the flashlight in her hand flickering with each passing minute. Her every step echoed through the long hallway, each shadow bending unnaturally with the wind's whistle. She had followed the clues, traced the forgotten files, unearthed sealed documents, and found her way back to the room where Lily Harrow had last been seen. But tonight wasn't just about answers. It was about facing what, or who, had buried them. She had received the final message hours earlier. A location. A time. No signature. But she knew. This was it. The endgame. And so she came, not because she wanted to, but because she had no choice left. The photograph. The settlement. The threats. The silence. They all led back here. Her heart pounded, adrenaline surging as she stepped into the old classroom. It looked untouched by time, everything coated in a thick layer of dust. But on the chalkboard, fresh writing in red, "Truth has a cost." She turned sharply as a figure stepped from the corner, tall, familiar, wearing a soaked grey overcoat and eyes that had seen too much. Principal Morgan. He looked at her with a sadness that was almost unbearable. "You weren't supposed to find her," he said quietly, voice trembling. "We were trying to protect you." She stared at him, horrified. "Protect me from my own sister?" His expression broke. "You don't understand," he muttered, stepping closer. Lily wasn't just a missing child. She was the key to something that would have destroyed everything: the school, the board, even the families that funded this place. There were names on those files. Politicians. Donors. They silenced her because they had to. They sent her away. Alive, at first. Then. He didn't finish. He couldn't. Mrs. Thompson felt her knees weaken, the weight of the truth slamming into her. Her sister had never disappeared. She had been erased, systemically, by people who had everything to lose if her story came out. Morgan reached into his coat and pulled out a small recorder. "I kept this," he said, his voice shaking. "It's a conversation. Between Caldwell and one of the board members. It confirms everything. It proves what happened. But once it's out there, there's no going back." He held it out to her, the moment stretching like glass about to shatter. But then the sound of footsteps broke the silence.